Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I've always been a firm believer in leadership transparency. If I wanted to build trust with my team, then I assumed the most honest approach was to say exactly what I was thinking. I used to believe that transparency meant sharing everything openly and often. But over time, and as I had more and more access to sensitive information, I began to understand that transparency requires more discernment than I initially realized. Sharing information is not inherently constructive. Yes, in some situations, absolutely, it builds clarity and connection, but at other times, it can actually create unnecessary uncertainty and can dilute authority. The difference lies in judgment and timing, and that's what I'm going to talk about in today's video. How to discern when to be honest and transparent, and when to withhold information, and when you should use some professional boundaries to know what to share and when. But before we get too far into it, if you do like this kind of video, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support is immensely appreciated as I continue to grow my channel. Now, let's dive in. So there is an important distinction between honesty and unfiltered disclosure. Leadership calls for truthfulness, but it also calls for responsibility in how that truth is delivered and when. Here's what I've learned throughout my years in leadership. Number one, I stopped equating openness with effectiveness. Early in my leadership journey, I believed that expressing uncertainty would automatically strengthen trust. I remember leading a team during a period of organizational restructuring, a little bit of downsizing. There were decisions happening at senior levels that I did not fully understand yet. Wanting to be transparent, I shared that I was unsure about what was coming next. My intention was to be honest, but there were unintended consequences that I just didn't foresee. Within a few days, I noticed anxiety rising across the team. People began speculating about job security and long-term direction. In trying to model openness, I had inadvertently amplified uncertainty. What my team needed in that moment was reassurance about what was stable, not a detailed account of my incomplete information. That experience changed how I think about transparency. It reminded me that leaders do not only share information, they also shape how information is interpreted. It was a great lesson in practicing patience before sharing information too early. It's always better to wait until you have enough answers to be able to address the key concerns, or you can end up creating a situation where people just make up their own stories and they'll fill in the missing information themselves. And that is very hard to undo. If you know anything about change management, it's always the best approach to follow the communication plan. So messaging is vetted, it's consistent, and it's timed appropriately, and also delivered by the right person at the right time in the right format. Number two, I became more aware of the weight my words carry. I've always said that vulnerability can strengthen relationships when it acknowledges a mistake or invites some learning. If I make an error in judgment, naming it directly does build credibility. If I recognize a blind spot, asking for input demonstrates humility. But at the same time, it's important to be mindful with this. Sharing unresolved frustration or half-formed strategic concerns can shift emotional processing onto the team. Leaders often have access to broader context, more information, competing priorities, and some confidential conversations. Not every internal deliberation serves the team when it's voiced prematurely. You don't want to have your team members form opinions about a senior leader, for example, or the organization that is solely based on your own experience. That's very dangerous territory. Now, I ask myself whether my transparency will create clarity or simply transfer my own tension into the room. That pause alone has prevented many conversations from becoming heavier than they needed to be. Number three, I clarified the boundaries of my role. We all know that leadership involves a different level of accountability. While collaboration and input from your team are essential, there are moments when decisiveness is required. In practice, this has meant being clearer about when I am inviting discussion and when I am communicating a decision. In collaborative spaces, I will say explicitly that I am seeking perspectives before forming a conclusion. In decision spaces, I explain the rationale and outline expectations. That clarity reduces the confusion. It allows people to contribute meaningfully without feeling responsible for carrying the full weight of organizational direction. Number 4, I developed simple disclosure guardrails. Before sharing sensitive information, I now reflect on a few practical questions such as, is this aligned with our goals? Is the timing appropriate? Will sharing this information strengthen trust and understanding? And also, am I the right person to communicate this? These questions create structure around my judgment. Transparency becomes intentional rather than reactive, and it also prevents me from sharing information at the wrong time. In the restructuring example that I mentioned earlier, those guardrails would have led me to share what was known, clarify what remained uncertain, and reinforce what the team could control. That approach would have maintained honesty and transparency while also providing some stability. Number 5, I reframed how I think about trust. There are many ways to build trust with a team. Trust develops through consistency and fairness, follow-through, relationships. Teams rarely require complete access to a leader's internal thinking. What they need is clarity about direction, rationale, and expectations. When leaders over-disclose, it can really blur the boundaries. Of course, when leaders withhold excessively, it can erode confidence as well. Sustainable trust exists somewhere between those two extremes, and maintaining that balance requires ongoing reflection. I have come to see transparency as a leadership discipline rather than a personality trait. Some leaders are just naturally open, while others are more reserved. I'm more of an open book, so that's why I had to learn how to carefully reflect before sharing too much information. Effective leadership does not depend on temperament alone. It depends on whether communication supports the health and the stability of the team. That's always the goal. The tension between authenticity and authority doesn't disappear. It requires continuous judgment. In high-pressure moments, the impulse to share everything can feel like integrity. But remember that sometimes integrity is demonstrated through restraint. If you are navigating how much to share, consider introducing a deliberate pause before responding. Ask yourself what your team most needs in that moment: access to your processing or clarity about next steps. You can always refrain from sharing until you've had a chance to collaborate with a colleague on the risks of sharing. Or better yet, let the team know that you want to share some sensitive information, but that you are still gathering some details. And once you have everything you need, you will make sure that they will have an opportunity to ask all their questions. Thoughtful transparency strengthens culture, and there are always ways to be transparent and honest without oversharing where it could cause more harm than good. The goal is not radical honesty for its own sake. The goal is communication that builds trust while preserving the steadiness required to lead. I hope today's video was helpful in some way. If so, just a quick reminder to like the video, subscribe to my channel, or tell me in the comments about how you approach knowing when to be transparent with your team. Thanks so much for supporting my channel. See you next time, and until then, keep on striving. Bye-bye.